tonight, if they can get this bill on the floor, there's no reason that it shouldn't pass, because as Senator John Cornyn told me earlier today, he's been in touch. The bill text being released will match the framework, and they've resolved all the issues.
Julie Sirkin live on Capitol Hill for us. Jules, thank you. Appreciate it. The Supreme Court today not yet issuing big rulings that we anticipate coming down on guns or abortion, but they did issue a decision on a pretty interesting case that deals with public money and education. What kind of education that money can be used for. And according to some experts, it does blur the lines of separation between church and state, because today the court ruled that state programs that give money for public school tuition cannot exclude religious schools. The whole thing came up in Maine, where a state program made taxpayer money available to families who lived in areas that didn't have a public school, right? So the money then, you live in a place that doesn't have a public school, the money was greenlit to use at a public or private school in other areas, but specifically not for religious schools like Catholic school. The court says that restriction violates religious freedom. Let me bring in Pete Williams now. Pete, talk to us about the bigger picture here, the broader significance this case could have as it relates to those distinctions between church and state.
I think what's happened over the years with the Supreme Court, Hallie, is that in the past, the Supreme Court would say the state should avoid becoming involved with religious institutions, giving taxpayer money to them in order to remain neutral on religion. Now the Supreme Court seems to be saying, no, that's not neutrality, that's discrimination. If you have a program that applies to public schools, it has to, and private schools, it has to apply to religious schools as well. So the immediate effect, of course, will be on Maine itself, Vermont, which has a similar program. And then there are a little over a dozen states, somewhere between 12 and 20, that are considering expanding the programs for school vouchers that give taxpayer money to parents that can be used to send their children to public or private schools. And the question there is, can that money then be used to send them to religious schools? And I would think that under today's ruling, the answer to that is probably yes. So this is a further taking down the wall of separation between church and state. What the Supreme Court said today in an opinion written by Justice Roberts is that Maine's program was too much of a wall between separation and church and state. What the dissenters say is that this lowers the wall too much.
Pete, it feels like as we hit the end of June, people start to hold their breath a little bit for the big decisions to come down out of the Supreme Court justices. We are awaiting major decisions on, for example, a guns case on concealed carry out of New York, an abortion case, of course, out of Mississippi on Dobbs. I know you don't know, nobody really knows, but so I guess I don't even know what the point of this question is, because I can't say when is that coming out, Pete, because if you knew, like, you would tell us. I know that you would, you know?
Well, I think, you know, most people look to end of June as when we get the big decisions, for a simple reason that that's when we usually get the big decisions. Right. But I think that all the indications are that this term is not going to end in June. It's going to go into early July, probably past the 4th of July, which is a holiday weekend anyway, into that week, maybe even next week. This is, you know, it's just taking longer for the court to get agreement on these big cases. This term has turned out to be such a blockbuster. Not only the argued cases, but all the cases that have arisen on what's called the emergency docket, what's derisively called the shadow docket. It's just been an extremely busy term. So I, of course, don't know, and I don't think anybody knows, including members of the court. I mean, decisions are done when they're done, and nobody can say when that is. But I would think we're going to still be talking about the Supreme Court early into July. That's my best guess right now.
Are you at all annoyed that that is delaying your retirement, Pete Williams?
No, my retirement is July 29th, and I think the court will be done by then.
Pete Williams, we appreciate you. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Appreciate it.
All right.
So today, when you talk about news overseas, you've got the State Department confirming the death of Steven Zabilski, a U.S. citizen who's now confirmed to be the second American killed in Ukraine in the fighting in the war there. His death was first announced in an obituary in a local paper, The Recorder, saying he was killed last month. So today, you now have the State Department reiterating its warnings that no U.S. citizen should go to Ukraine at all, and that if any U.S. citizen is there, they need to leave immediately. We're also hearing today from Cheryl Griner, the wife of WNBA star Brittany Griner, who's been detained in Russia for months after officials allegedly found cannabis oil in her luggage. In a new interview with the AP, her wife says that for 2 weeks, she had a call set up through the U.S. Embassy to speak with Griner, BG, she calls her, for their anniversary. But because the U.S. Embassy in Moscow was not staffed that day, the call never happened.
It's ridiculous. It makes me hopeless, in the fact that our government is doing anything to get my wife back home.
Ali Arouzi is joining us now. And Ali, Sherelle says that she has not seen her wife. She has not spoken with her wife on the phone in 4 months now. Today, the White House is calling what happened an unfortunate mistake. Tell us more.
Hi, that's right, Hallie. They're saying it's an unfortunate mistake, but for Griner and her partner, it's a big separation, and it means that she really doesn't know what's going on with her wife, who's being held in Russian custody. And, all the stories we've heard from Americans that have been released from Russian custody are not good, so that would have given her some comfort. Look, the phone call was set up 2 weeks earlier. They had plenty of time to organize it. When Cheryl Griner called the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, she called it 11 times, and nobody answered the phone. At first, she thought the Russians were running interference, trying to stop her from talking to her wife. Later, she learned that it was a Saturday afternoon, it was after hours, and everybody had simply left. So there was nobody there to answer her phone call. Now, they say it's a glitch, but that is pretty disorganized if you're asking their family. Cheryl Griner says that she's bitterly disappointed with her government and has lost all trust in them, because she says if they can't organize a simple phone call between her and her wife, how are they going to get her out of Russian custody?
Ali, we're going to, as always, we are staying very much on top of that story, but we're also hearing about the death of Stephen Sobilski, one of the thousands, it seems, of foreign fighters who went to Ukraine to fight Russia when they invaded. Do we know anything else about what happened to him?
Well, the State Department has confirmed his death. They said that they have been in close contact with his family and they're providing all the consular support necessary. But they said because of his death and because of privacy issues and how painful it is for the family, they're not going to comment anymore. But an obituary was published on him on the 1st of June, and that gave a little more details. It said that he was killed on the 15th of May in a village called Dorozhnyanka, which is in the Zaporizhia region, during heavy fighting. And not much more is really known about that, how else he died. But we do know he's 52 years old. He leaves behind a wife and 5 stepchildren. And again, it goes to the U.S. saying, listen, Americans shouldn't come here. It's incredibly dangerous. But I've got to tell you, Ali, I've met a lot of Americans out here working in various capacities. The other day, we met an American who is working on the front lines, getting injured people out. I'm in close contact with him. He's told me that he's had several close calls. So it is an extraordinarily dangerous place for Americans to come. And we're seeing, this is the second one that's been killed.
Yeah.
2 others have been captured. The third one possibly captured. So, the dangers are well known for them, but still many Americans come here, whether they're fighting in the Foreign Legion or helping medics on the front line.
Ali Arouzi, thank you. Appreciate you being there for us. Back here in Washington, we've got President Biden celebrating the availability of the COVID vaccine for kids under 5 today, visiting a vaccination clinic right here in Washington, where some of the first shots were given to those little kiddos. This is the last big age group, as you know, that became eligible for vaccines. You see the president, the first lady here, talking to kids. At one point, he was holding babies, greeting some of the workers who were giving shots. The president also had some criticism for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Remember, DeSantis' state was the only one, according to a source familiar with it, that did not pre-order vaccines. Listen.
Let's be clear. Elected officials shouldn't get in the way and make it more difficult for parents who want their children to be vaccinated, who want to protect them and those around them.
The president also says now is not the time for politics, and parents need to be able to do everything they can to keep their kids safe. Facebook, just today, settling a lawsuit that had accused the company of letting its housing ad system discriminate against Black people, Hispanic, Jewish people, other groups too. The suit was brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. And it said housing providers could actually tailor ads so that people of certain races or religions or gender would or would not see certain listings, right? They gave an example of this. Okay, they say advertisers asked Facebook to exclude users who had an interest in topics like Judaism, the Jewish home, Islam, Christian, among others. Keep in mind, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 means a housing provider cannot discriminate based on race, sex, other protected classes. Meta has denied all wrongdoing. Tom Winter has reported on this and joins us now. Tom, the Justice Department says Facebook's algorithms is what really let advertisers get away with this. What else do we know about how this happened?
Right. So, Hallie, it's one of the things that's made Facebook so successful, to the tune of $114 billion in ad revenue last year alone. And what that algorithm does, it's a specialized software that allows them to target individual people with specific ads, and the advertiser can choose those groups. So it might make sense that somebody in New York, like myself, doesn't get the same type of advertisements that somebody like you who lives in Washington, D.C. gets. And, of course, then we can break it down from personal interests, male, female, et cetera. The problem with that, federal attorneys for the Justice Department in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York say, is with the Fair Housing Act, you can't do that. And by the way, that even goes to advertising. So you can't advertise to specific groups, and you can't convey those advertisements as well. So that's where Facebook, they say, ran afoul. Now, this settlement is something that is going to be going on through the end of the year. The system is still in place. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the two specialty programs are called Special Ad Audience and Lookalike Audience. Those algorithms have to go away by the end of the year. And for the housing advertising market, according to this settlement, Hallie, Facebook's going to come up with a whole new platform for them to use so that everybody gets the advertisements that are appropriate for them.
Tom Winter, it's an interesting topic. Thank you for reporting on this, for bringing us that news this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Coming up here on the show, Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson settling 20 of the 24 sexual misconduct lawsuits against him. So we'll tell you why he may still not be getting on the field when the season starts. Plus, Dave Chappelle does not want his high school naming its theater after him. We'll talk about what's behind that decision and what he said next.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Right now on NBC News Now,
We've got all the angles covered tonight.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We've got 3 new developments just this afternoon.
We begin this hour with breaking news and the growing impact of Russia's assault.
This is what it looks and feels like to try to escape Ukraine.
I don't want us to say goodbye.
This factory has gone from making kitchen pots to lethal items.
There's an intense artillery battle underway between Ukrainian forces and Russian troops.
Breaking news this morning.
The heartbreak, the grief, and the tears that we have seen here are all tragically familiar. Was there a school officer on campus? Because that's what we've been told.
No.
The shooting is once again reigniting the debate over gun laws.
If it's Tuesday, it is primary night.
The highest profile races yet this year. We are talking elections in a battleground state.
The official confirmation of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson.
let's zoom out a bit to our changing climate. What do we think that the new normal is going to be?
We got some promising news this morning about the rollout of COVID vaccines for children under 5.
Have you seen a demand for mental health services increase among Latinos?
It's time for another honest conversation about what it means to be Asian American.
The people of the Chamizal neighborhood aren't the only ones experiencing what they call environmental injustice.
We're here to try to start conversation.
A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage.
We're coming on the air with the news, NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Happy first official day of summer. How are you celebrating? By sweating profusely? 34 million of us are feeling the heat. Because from the Midwest to the South and the East, there is this, there you see it, heat dome. cranking up temps to maybe record-setting numbers. Cities from Chicago to Memphis, even Cleveland, are hitting temperatures close to, if not into the hundreds. We found our Shaq Brewster with the enviable task of standing out in Chicago in the midst of it all. Shaq, this is the second time in like 2 days that we're together talking about this heat dome. It is not going away. It feels like there's plenty of warning for people there because this is like dangerous levels of heat potentially. I get that it's summer, the first day of summer. I get that it's hot, but this is to a level like we really haven't seen in some of these cities.
No, that's exactly right, Hallie. And it's not just Chicago. I mean, 70% of Americans are facing temperatures above 90 degrees or will by the end of the week. About 55 million Americans going to feel triple-digit temperatures, and that's what many folks are feeling here in Chicago today. Around Midway Airport, it hit up 100 degrees. Chicago O'Hare Airport, about 98 degrees, according to the National Weather Service. We've been here along the lakefront all day long. While people got in their morning jogs and were moving nice and quickly early this morning, things have gone down and slowed down to a much slower pace, and people are much more sweaty as they're walking along the lakefront. I want you to listen to some of the conversations I've been having with people because people have different ways to explain the heat and different solutions for how they're handling this heat.
I mean, this is what I've been waiting for, but I didn't think it was going to be this hot.
You're like sweating and it's just like uncomfortable is like the word to like describe it. Like it almost makes you want winter back again, but yeah.
Do you mean that in Chicago?
Okay, maybe not that bad, but like a good 60 would be nice.
You know, Hallie, I know you've seen me report from Chicago for some time. You've seen me in the cold, the frigid cold. Now we're in the blistering heat. I have to say I prefer this.
We got to bring you inside, but you know, you're in your little coat in the winter, you're in your little short sleeves in the summer. Let me ask you a real question though. Like in DC, when it gets really hot, there's pools open. Like we go to the pool. Chicago's can't do that this week. Why aren't the pools open? Like why didn't the mayor open up the pools?
Yeah, the opening of the pools has been delayed at this point to July 5th, despite the temperatures. Hallie, this is all related to the pandemic. There's a lifeguard shortage here in the city of Chicago, so they don't have enough lifeguards to open the city's 49 pools. They said they're looking for, an alderman says they're looking for about 300 lifeguards. So they're trying to do what they can. They've offered a $500 signing bonus for lifeguards who come in and who get trained. They removed the residency requirement that initially existed here in Chicago. They're even offering about $600 if you refer someone who then becomes a lifeguard. But until July 5th, you don't have any of the official city pools open. And there's a potential suggestion that you might not get all of them open once they finally do open, depending on how many lifeguards they are able to recruit, Hallie.
That's tough in a heat wave, Shaq. I fear the next time we see you, you will be lifeguarding at one of those pools, reporting on that. Shaq Brewster, many adventures ahead for you, friend. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, something like 40,000 employees of the railroad in the UK walked out on the job today, meaning a total nightmare for commuters. The workers want better pay, they want better working conditions, and they want the train network to be modernized. Only about 20% of trains there were running today. Number 2, a lawyer for women who accused Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson of sexual misconduct says he has now settled 20 of 24 cases against him. The women had accused Watson of improperly touching them after he hired them as massage therapists and personal trainers. Watson has denied any wrongdoing. The NFL is investigating him, and he faces a potential suspension for violating the league's personal conduct policy. A spokesperson today says the NFL does not have a timeline for when it expects to finish that investigation. Number 3, Brooks Koepka, reportedly the latest golf star to join LIV Golf. That's that controversial Saudi-backed league. The 4-time major champion is expected to make his first LIV appearance in a couple weeks in Portland. Number 4, comedian Dave Chappelle says he actually doesn't want his theater at his former high school to be named after him. He went to the Duke Ellington School of the Arts here in D.C., but he got backlash from some students over his comments about the LGBTQ+ community in his new Netflix special, critics calling what he said transphobic. Chappelle said he thought the backlash against him lacked nuance, but he also says he doesn't want a theater with his name on it to distract students from focusing on the meaning of their art and what they do. Number 5, Krispy Kreme introducing a lineup of donut-inspired soft-serve ice cream today. That's right. If you love Krispy Kreme donuts, you can now get it in a cone ice cream milkshake version, too. The chain says they plan to gradually roll them out to other cities in what is an apparent quest to become the world domination of all things dessert-related. You get everything on this show. You get Krispy Kreme donuts and heat waves with Shaq Brewster on this show, man. How are you going to turn away? You can't, because when we come back, we got more, including more people voting in races across the country today, more tests of Donald Trump's influence, of a live look at what to watch for as these votes are going down after the break.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
We'll meet Ukrainians who are defending their country one block at a time. When you were still in Kiev, could you hear the bombing? My name is Lester. Hey, who's this? The fire has grown leaps and bounds. What you see behind me is typical. How you doing?
Pretty bad.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
When was the last time you made space to listen to somebody?
What I learned from a very young age is radical love, radical forgiveness.
We are meeting people one after the next who have made profound changes.
It showed a lot of personal strength for me. Why am I trying to make other people happy over myself?
So many life lessons that are going on in these conversations. We're watching a transformation.
Join Hoda Kotb for her podcast, Making Space. Listen now.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Susah buang air besar. Minum Nudulax di malam hari. Dengan kandungan bisakodil, efektif dalam semalam menimbulkan keinginan buang air besar. Paginya jadi lebih lancar. Nudulax, atasi sembelit, aktivitas lancar.
Today, voters in Alabama are putting the Trump endorsement to the test in a runoff for the state's Republican Senate nomination. So they're picking who is going to represent them in the GOP lane in this Senate race. Incumbent Congressman Mo Brooks, the guy you see here, initially had the endorsement from former President Trump. But then Mr. Trump took it back during the campaign after Brooks told voters, move past the 2020 election and Trump's lies about voter fraud. Okay, well, then Brooks is like, actually, can I get that endorsement back after he made it to the runoff? Donald Trump then responding by backing Brooks's opponent, Katie Britt, the woman you see on your screen. So that's what's going down in Alabama. In Georgia, you've got a different runoff on the Democratic side. It's for Secretary of State. The winner tonight will face GOP nominee Brad Raffensperger in the general. In Virginia tonight, 2 Republican primary races for House seats now held by Democrats. Republicans think they have a good chance to flip those seats. That could help them take back the House in November. Joining me now is Mark Murray. Okay, let's talk Alabama, right? Because that is one that is, I think, by far the most interesting and significant race of the day, or at least, yeah, I think that's fair, right, Mark? I mean, I think that matters because it is likely that whoever gets the Republican Senate nomination will have a very good chance at being the next Alabama senator, right, versus a Democrat. You've got Mo Brooks, Katie Britt, this test of the power of Donald Trump here.
Yeah, Hallie, and, you know, in a lot of ways, when Donald Trump decided to intervene and finally endorse Katie Britt in this contest, it came after all the winds were kind of blowing in Katie Britt's direction. She's out advertising Mo Brooks by nearly a 10-to-1 margin over the airwaves right now. She's picked up some key endorsements beyond Donald Trump's and ended up getting 45% of the vote in the original balloting last month when you ended up having Mo Mo Brooks at 29%. So she got really close to being able to cross that threshold to avoid a runoff. And so all signs are pointing to her as the big front runner tonight. And it was no surprise that Donald Trump just endorsed her just a couple of weeks ago, knowing that the winds were already blowing in her direction.
What else are you seeing as significant? Like, what should we be talking about tomorrow morning when some of the results start coming in?
Yeah, and so the other thing you talked about, that Secretary of State's race in Georgia, be given just the high-profile nature that Brad Raffensperger played in today's January 6 hearings. Democrats are going to pick who their nominee is in this contest in November. And as we've learned, Hallie, that, you know, it does matter who a Secretary of State is, whether a Republican, a Democrat, a pro-Trump person. These kind of offices do end up mattering, and we're going to be watching them throughout the fall. And then those races in Virginia for the general election, Abigail Spanberger, Elaine Luria, big Democratic stars who won office back in 2018. They're going to be facing a really tough environment and tough matches for their reelection this November, just with the political winds blowing in the Democrats' face right now.
Especially in two districts that both went for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor, not too long ago, right?
Yeah, these are swing districts, Allie, and this is why, in a lot of ways, Democrats have always circled Luria and Spanberger to be stars, that, you know, the people who can win the swing districts in the 2018 cycle, in 2020. But both cycles, Hallie, were kind of Democratic years, and this is not shaping up to be a Democratic year, and it's why the Cook Political Report has both of these contests being toss-up, and we'll end up getting the Republican nominees for these races tonight.
Mark Murray, thanks so much. Good to see you. Coming up, gas prices may still be ridiculously high, but it doesn't look like that's going to stop a lot of us from getting in the car. Why AAA is expecting record high road tripping for the 4th of July. And imagine checking out the security cam at your house and seeing this. Oh yeah, a bear fight. What? What? We're going to talk about that in the local next.
We'll meet Ukrainians who are defending their country one block at a time. When you were still in Kiev, could you hear the bombing? My name is Lester. Who's this? Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
At 73, Prince Charles is still waiting for the job that is his birthright.
Do we want Charles? Do we want a monarchy?
I'm Keir Simmons, and we'll take on these questions and more in our new podcast, Born to Rule. Listen now.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
We'll meet Ukrainians who are defending their country one block at a time. When you were still in Kiev, could you hear the bombing? My name is Lester. Who's this?
This is a very different kind of program. We're here to start conversation about the big things happening in our world. Professor, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but what do we think that the new normal is going to be? Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs during this pandemic and their relationship to their employers? What is your biggest tip for any parent who's concerned about this? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
At 73, Prince Charles is still waiting for the job that is his birthright.
Do we want Charles? Do we want a monarchy?
I'm Keir Simmons, and we'll take on these questions and more in our new podcast, Born to Rule. Listen now.
This is a very different kind of program. We're here to start conversation about the big things happening in our world. Professor, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but what do we think that the new normal is going to be? Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs during this pandemic and their relationship to their employers? What is your biggest tip for any parent who's concerned about this? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Baru Nivea Men Cool Kick Deodoran. Rasakan sensasi dingin instan yang menjaga ketiak tetap kering dan wangi segar seharian. Baru Nivea Men Cool Kick Deodoran. Rasakan bedanya.
NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, more than 1,000 Southwest pilots, Southwest Airlines that is, lined up outside Love Field in Dallas today. They want better treatment and new union contracts. Now, the pilots say it's not a walkout, but it was a informational picket, they say, to get the company's attention. Southwest Airlines told our local affiliate it is aware that off-duty pilots picketed and respects the rights of its employees to express their opinions. This didn't affect any flights for Southwest. From our Northeast Bureau, one person has been killed, 2 others were hurt after a tractor-trailer hit a popular sports bar in Poughkeepsie, New York on Monday. You can see a whole section of the place just collapsed. Investigators are still trying to figure out why the trailer veered off the road. And from our West Coast Bureau, a security camera caught 2 bears facing off in the carport of a home in South Lake Tahoe. These are the bears. Ugh, you see it. They're on their hind legs, charging at each other. There was a person who lives in the house. She heard the growling. She thought it was just a bear going after like a coyote or a raccoon or something. Who won? Do we know? No, we don't know. Okay, we're gonna find out more on this crazy story for you. Even with gas prices near $5 a gallon, AAA is expecting a record number of us to hit the road for the 4th of July. Are you planning a road trip for the holiday? Chances are good that you probably are, because 42 million of us are expected to drive 50 miles or more over the holiday weekend. Only 3.5 million people are planning to fly, something AAA thinks could be because folks are worried about cancellations and delays. They say the number of people traveling by air will be the lowest since 2011. It's coming as President Biden is considering a gas tax holiday, which would temporarily knock about 18 cents a gallon off the cost of gas. Lawmakers are going a step further in California, announcing an investigation into what they say is price gouging. Excuse me. Remember, Californians are paying some of the highest prices in the country, $4.97 a gallon across the nation, but in California, it's $6.38 a gallon. Ouch. Julian Kent is joining us now. So let me take this in a couple of buckets here. What is up with more people wanting to drive? I will tell you, I'm supposed to fly to New York this week. I'm not going to fly because I am concerned about the flight situation. I got to get there for, coverage and for the Today Show and everything else. Is it that people want to drive because they like driving and they want to, or because they're concerned about trying to get an airplane after like all these cancellations we hear about?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And overall, when you look at the bigger picture, this is really the summer of revenge travel. How many people have already told you, this is my first trip, my first wedding, my first family reunion in more than 2 years? Basically, people are fed up. And with inflation going up yet again last month, what we're also seeing is a lot of this inflationary psychology playing out. You've got people who are worried about prices going up even more, so they're spending now because there's basically fear that what you want, is going to get even more expensive. And driving somewhere makes a lot more economic sense for people. And then you got those flight cancellations. So you're seeing a lot of these drivable destinations get a huge bump in tourism this summer. But I was just looking, global destinations, though, are pretty hot, too. Google says that searches for passport appointments surged 300% in the first 4 months of this year. So a lot of people saying, I'll risk that flight cancellation, Hal.
Yeah, no kidding. I love this idea, too. I don't know that I love it, but I love that we're talking about it because I think it's so interesting, a gas tax holiday, because it is a politically somewhat complicated thing that the Biden administration is going to have to figure out. The president has said he's going to make a decision by the end of the week about it. Yes, in the short term, it'd be great. That's like an immediate 18 cents off a gallon of gas, right? Snap of a finger. What happens, when that temporary relief goes away? You know what I mean, Joe? And what happens if that's maybe right before the midterms? I mean, there's some minefields here.
Oh, there's tons of minefields, and the prices are likely to continue as long as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues. So the federal gas tax, as we know, is 18.4 cents a gallon, right? And then states have their own additional gas taxes. And right now, about 20 states are thinking about doing a gas holiday. You've got 4 states, Connecticut, Maryland, Georgia, and New York, all having their own gas tax holidays. And yes, consumers are saving. You might be feeling that if you live in some of those states. But according to a study from Wharton at Penn, even though you save in the short term, the amount that you save from the gas tax holiday actually gets smaller as the end of that gas holiday approaches. And so some gas prices can actually come back higher, according to Wharton, than they were without the gas tax holiday at all, which is just sort of a mind, it just blows your mind.
It is a mind blower, which I assume is what you're going to say, Joe. There's also President Biden responding to Chevron today, calling the CEO sensitive. After Chevron responded to this letter to oil companies asking for what the Chevron CEO called an honest conversation about gas prices. You've got California, where you are going even further. They're looking into whether people are getting straight up ripped off, right? Because that's what they're seeing in this 2019 review that suggested big oil companies might be overcharging by like $1 a gallon. It's all, I think, worth having a conversation about, but it's not like, again, tomorrow this is something that could help, or is it?
I mean, I wish that were the case, right? But all of these steps are lengthy conversations. They're federal government measures that would not help you out with your 4th of July gas prices and what you pay at the pump. But what I find so interesting is you've got this back and forth between the White House and the oil companies, and it's really revelatory because at the very bottom of the letter from CEO Mike Wirth from Chevron, he is implying that President Biden is not involved enough in the discussion on how to bring down prices in the long run. The piece that I thought was so interesting is he said, I encourage you to also send your senior advisors to this meeting so they too can engage in a robust conversation, implying that the White House is not represented enough through Secretary Granholm, who will be meeting with Chevron and the oil companies. So a little bit of rough around the edges right there. And what we're starting to see is that, you know, the White House wants to blame the oil companies. The oil companies feel like they're not represented in a real reform conversation. And so that's where the challenge is, to really work that out to bring prices down, if that is even possible given the supply and demand problem.
Joel and Kent, I appreciate you breaking that down for us. It is complicated and you do a masterful job at it. Appreciate it. Still to come, the Biden administration is taking another step forward, trying to get people to quit smoking. And this involves what is in the cigarette itself. We're going to get into that and your nicotine next.
Murah banget kan? Jago Pack emang jagonya ongkir murah.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from the Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, a taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks, let me get in. Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
When was the last time you made space to listen to somebody?
What I learned from a very young age is radical love, radical forgiveness.
We are meeting people one after the next who have made profound changes.
It showed a lot of personal strength for me. Why am I trying to make other people happy over myself?
So many life lessons that are going on in these conversations. We're watching a transformation.
Join Hoda Kotb for her podcast, Making Space. Listen now.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
It's a can't-miss summer on Today.
they are walking strong.
Elegant and pretty easy to prepare.
How to cut costs on your vacation? Vicky has the answers. Every single thing you need for the best summer yet.
Only on Today.
Quick update for you on a Democratic primary runoff we've been watching. Jessica Cisneros is now conceding the race to Representative Henry Cuellar in Texas's 28th. The congressman won by just 290 votes in a South Texas district that includes parts of San Antonio and stretches down to the Mexico border. Remember, Cisneros had challenged Cuellar from his left. This was a very high-profile race. Cuellar, in part, was being challenged by Cisneros because of his pro-gun, his anti-abortion stances. In Cisneros' concession statement, she says she's calling for, quote, a more progressive and accountable Democratic Party. In Washington, meantime, you've got the Biden administration moving today to try to lower how much nicotine is in cigarettes in the hopes that that could get millions of people to quit smoking. You know, listen, do we need, like, we're going to do the 8th grade science thing. Nicotine has very addictive properties that make it hard to kick cigs. Right? You know that. I know you know that. About 480,000 Americans die of smoking-related causes every year. Now, here's the deal with this nicotine situation. An administration official says it's super early. This is a very early stage. And what this means is that the FDA can start to look into changing the rules. So this is not even a changing of the rule. It's a beginning of the conversation about changing the rule. You've also got to think about the opposition here, especially from tobacco companies that could delay or push this off altogether. But this would be a move that fits in with this administration's goal to cut cancer deaths. Earlier this year, President Biden promised to bring down cancer death rates by 50% over 25 years as part of his Cancer Moonshot initiative. Dr. Natalie Azar is here to break this down. And I want to make sure people get this grain of salt here, Dr. Natalie, because, again, not a done deal, not even close to a done deal, but supporters hope it gets done because they say this could save millions of lives in the generations to come. Talk about the impact from a public health standpoint.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Hallie. I mean, experts have said that this very well could be the most impactful public health intervention ever in modern times. And comparing to vaccines and to antibiotics, think about that. That's a pretty profound statement. And they're basing it on not just conjecture, but past research. There was a New England Journal article in 2018 that said if we lower nicotine levels, it could save 8 million lives by the end of this century. You mentioned 480,000 deaths per year related to, related to smoking. Well, that's about 1,300 deaths per day that are premature, that are related to smoking. And by the way, smoking is the #1 cause of preventable death in this country. It's not just cancer, but it's heart disease, diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, stroke, COPD. The list goes on and on of smoking-related chronic illness, Hallie.
Let's talk about the pushback from tobacco companies, too, because this is coming as we reported on this show. The FDA a couple months ago also proposed banning menthol cigarettes. How much do you see sort of the tobacco companies putting up a fight against these kinds of rules?
It is going to be fierce. Brace yourself. I think some of the counter arguments we've heard is that, well, prohibition didn't work, so this isn't going to work. Look, the tobacco lobby is super, super powerful, and I think you are going to hear from some conservatives. It's going to become political, as it always does, that some conservative politicians are going to think that this is government overreach, and it could sort of spill into the midterms, and, you can sort of see where that's going to go. Expect a big, big fight on this, Hallie, big pushback.
Dr. Natalie Azar, good to have you with us. Thank you so much for that reality check. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this very busy Tuesday. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow. Same time, same place. Stick with us because more coverage picks up right now.
Tonight, breaking news, the plane emergency at Miami International Airport. The video just coming in. A Red Air flight from the Dominican Republic up in flames after officials say the landing gear in the nose of the plane collapsed. The race to evacuate all 126 passengers and crew on board, a live update moments away. Plus, the disturbing new details from Uvalde. The chilling image of officers armed with rifles and body armor inside the hallway as the carnage unfolded. One of Texas's top cops cops revealing it appears the classroom door was unlocked as officers waited outside for over an hour. The official calling the response a, quote, abject failure, placing the blame on the on-scene commander who testified today behind closed doors. And breaking tonight, Senate leaders saying they've reached a deal on gun legislation that could prevent another one of these tragedies. The dramatic testimony at the January 6 hearings, state officials, including Arizona's House Speaker, detailing the pressure by former President Trump and his allies to change election results and possibly send in fake electors. A Georgia election worker now saying there is nowhere she feels safe after becoming the target of false claims by the former president. Years of high gas prices? The startling prediction today from the CEO of ExxonMobil suggesting the pain at the pump is here to stay, what it could mean for summer travel. The race for 2024, is President Biden planning a run for re-election? What White House insiders are saying. And on the Republican side, how likely is a matchup between Trump and his once loyal supporter, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? And the mystery on Sesame Street, the episode once pulled from TV for being too scary, now making the rounds on social media. So what's in it? Top Story starts right now.
Eh, jangan gegabah. Aktifkan nyala di One Mobile. Cek, cus, cuan. Dan jadi financially fit.
And good evening. We begin with breaking news. The plane bursting into flames after landing at Miami's International Airport. New eyewitness video just coming in showing the Red Air flight from the Dominican Republic as it landed. Take a look. Black smoke immediately billowing out of the aircraft. Officials say the landing gear in the nose collapsed. Flames then shooting out of the plane. Tonight we're hearing 126 passengers and crew members were evacuated and bused to the terminal. NBC South Florida investigative reporter and former fighter pilot Willard Shepard joins us now live by phone. Willard, I know you have a ton of sources over there at the Miami International Airport. What are they telling you?
Well, what they're saying is that fortunately at this point we don't have word of any injuries or anything like that, despite this incredibly dramatic video that we're seeing coming from Miami International Airport. This plane coming in to land towards the east there. Apparently no word or warning of any trouble. The Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Fire Department, the airport team is right near where this plane eventually came to rest. And why they got there so quickly, we didn't see anything in advance that there had been a call that there was any type of mechanical problem. It appears what happened is that the plane simply landed, the landing gear collapsed, and then we see all of this smoke and then the evacuation to get these 126 people out. It looks like with no injuries, despite what we're seeing, really a very fortunate situation that this was not worse today at Miami International Airport. Tom, back to you.
Incredible. The preliminary reports say no one was injured. We can see that Miami-Dade Fire Rescue there at the airport was immediately on the scene. It almost as if they were ready for this to happen. Willard, I want to ask you, looking at this plane come down, you mentioned the nose gear there, but it looks like the fire started on the other side, on the right side of the plane, if you will, maybe by the engine or the wing. Any theories yet or any reporting on what exactly caught fire there?
No, but of course, Tom, landing and taking off are the most dangerous phases of flight. So there can be a lot of other factors that come into that. When you mentioned what you just told me about seeing that the landing gear coming down, obviously a lot of hydraulics, electrical equipment when this type of thing happens and the landing gear comes down. So there could have been some type of electrical system where they had an electrical fire that started this, but it eventually we see this landing gear collapse, which says there's some type of hydraulic problem, should have been locked in there. But once this plane did come to rest, all the emergency personnel and frankly, this crew doing a good job to get those 126 people out.
Willard, real quick, we know that Red Air is the airline. It's a relatively new airline for the Dominican Republic. Obviously, that is a big hot spot for summer travel, also with spring break as well. How quickly can the fire department there at the airport respond to a plane like this? Because they have units that are there at the airport, correct?
Yeah, correct. And they train specifically the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue firefighters and paramedics that are stationed at the airport receive lengthy, extensive training going in and out of all different types of aircraft, the heights of aircraft, of course, being different, the number of people that are on board and could be on board. They receive extensive training with all of this, also dealing with flammables, putting out aviation fuel, these types of things. And again, this fire department is located right in the middle of the runway sections of Miami International Airport, so they can respond immediately, and they did this afternoon.
All right, Willard Shepard from NBC South Florida. Willard, we thank you for your reporting tonight. All right, we turn to our other big story that we're covering tonight. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. That's how long officials say students and teachers in Uvalde spent trapped inside of a classroom with a gunman. And tonight we're learning they may have been behind an unlocked door. This image appearing to show multiple officers with weapons and a ballistic shield in the hallway of Robb Elementary while shots were being fired. The director of the Texas Department of Public Safety with blistering testimony during a state Senate hearing saying the classroom door did not lock from the inside, meaning it's likely officers did not even check to see if it was open. Many placing the response on Uvalde Schools Police Chief Pete Arredondo, who is also under more fire for testifying behind closed doors today. That's him there in the back corner of the elevator. But breaking news tonight also from Washington, where a bipartisan group of senators say they have reached a deal on gun legislation, the country hoping to never see another tragedy like this one again. Here's NBC's Gabe Gutierrez.
These still images from surveillance video reviewed by the Austin American-Statesman and the Texas Tribune, but not by NBC News, show multiple officers armed with rifles and ballistic shields inside Robb Elementary as the massacre unfolded.
A law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure and antithetical to everything we've learned over the last 2 decades since the Columbine massacre.
Today, the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Stephen McGraw, said just 3 minutes after the gunman entered the school, there were enough armed officers there to stop him. Instead, he says they waited for 1 hour and 14 minutes.
The on-scene commander waited for a radio and rifles. Then he waited for shields. Then he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed.
McCraw says he believes the doors to the classrooms where 19 students and 2 teachers were killed were unlocked. Today, he provided the most detailed timeline of the carnage so far, based on surveillance footage, body camera video, and 911 calls. At 11:28 a.m., the shooter crashed his vehicle into a ditch. A minute later, a teacher called 911, reporting a man with a gun. At 11:31, a patrol car sped into the school parking lot, but drove by the shooter. At 11:33, he went inside and started shooting into classrooms. Within 3 minutes, 3 Uvalde police officers with 2 rifles entered the building. Seconds later, so did 2 school district officers, including Chief Pete Arredondo. He called a police landline from his cell phone, saying, "We don't have enough firepower. We all have pistols." That was directly contradicted today.
The only thing stopping the hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. The officers had weapons, the children had none.
Over the next 30 minutes, 911 calls from students inside the classroom begin. More ballistic shields arrive. Chief Arredondo requests the master key, and the gunman fires more rounds. Chief Arredondo then says, "We've lost 2 kids. These walls are thin. If he starts shooting, we're going to lose more kids. I hate to say, we have to put those to the side right now." Minutes later, people are going to ask why we're taking so long. We're trying to preserve the rest of the life.
The torrent of illogical statements here and it is preposterous.
More than an hour after the gunman entered, Chief Arredondo says we're having a blank problem getting into the room because it is locked. He's got an AR-15 and he's shooting everywhere like crazy. Not until 12:50 does a Border Patrol tactical team breach the classroom and kill the gunman. as Chief Arredondo ignored questions from reporters today in Uvalde. Anger.
He needs to be held accountable. He needs to answer questions publicly and provide information for us.
All right, Gabe joins us now live. Gabe, so many questions here. I want to start with the allegations of the door being unlocked. We heard the chief there over the police radio claiming the door was locked. Can you tell us everything we know about that issue right now at this point?
Yeah, Tom, so many people in the community are asking this question. And today, again, we heard from the Texas Department of Public Safety, the director of that department, that he believed that at this point, it looks like the door was unlocked, or at least not secure in his words, and that officers, according to that surveillance video you're looking there, never went to check. Now, Tom, you'll remember the teacher inside one of those classrooms had previously said in an interview that he believed that the door was broken somehow, that it wasn't locking correctly. And again, that is also at the center of the investigation right now, Tom.
So, Gabe, the school's police chief was also at the center of this report. He's at the center of the investigation. What is he saying tonight? We saw him going into that elevator, ducking reporters.
Well, he's not saying anything publicly tonight, Tom. He ducked into that elevator after testifying, we're told, for more than 5 hours in front of a Texas House committee. That's separate from the hearing that I just reported on. The Texas House committee testimony, though, was behind closed doors. Now, earlier this month, Tom, Chief Arredondo had said that he did not think he was the scene's incident commander, but many families of the victims are calling for his resignation tonight, Tom.
And Gabe, before you go, briefly, I know there's late breaking news tonight on the gun deal from the Senate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just a short time ago, Tom, the bipartisan group of legislators announced the text for that legislation. It includes funding for mental health care and school security, as we've been reporting, including enhanced background checks as well for gun buyers under 21. We expect the first procedural vote on that gun deal later tonight, and potentially there could be a final vote by the end of this week, Tom.
All right, we know you'll stay on top of it for us. Gabe Gutierrez for us tonight. Gabe, thank you. So how did this happen, and what is next in the investigation for Chief Arredondo? I want to bring in NBC News law enforcement analyst Jim Kavanaugh. Jim, I first want to get your reaction to the headline today. The director of Texas Public Safety testifying that the door was unlocked. What are your thoughts on this news? I mean, is that even possible? Could the police assume that the door was locked without even checking it? I mean, what would the protocol be in this situation?
Well, you always check the door. We always did on search warrants, too. We would check the doorknob before you hit it with a ram, because if it's not locked, you go in. But this is unconscionable, Tom. This team is not moved aggressively to make contact with the killer. Active shooting training was you move aggressively to contact the killer. So you engage the killer, and then you can, kill him or stop him. They're not in a position here to engage the killer. That's not the breach point. When Gabe reported this early this morning, when I first saw this picture, the first thing that hit me was, well, they're not at the breach point. The breach point is the door. You have to be pressing aggressively to contact, and you have to go for the killer. So you should try the door, of course, just going right up the hallway. You've got ballistic shields. You've got a half a dozen rifles. Now,
you're saying these officers, Jim, you're saying these officers are still so far away to even make that assessment. They're nowhere near that door handle.
You're right. You go aggressively to engage the shooter or to reach the breach point where he may have locked the door. In this case, he didn't even lock the door. Plus, Tom, they had a Halligan tool, and that came out in some reporting today. A Halligan tool is a small pry bar we always carried on the ATF tactical teams, and it's to pry open a door. And you can pry it. It's a firefighter's tool. All fire trucks have them. But we carried them just to pry open, pries the door jamb right open. So even if they didn't have the key, they had a Halligan tool. So everything they did here, anything they would have done with action would have been right. In other words, if they would have went around and shot through the window, that would have been good. If they would have set up an emergency assault through the window and then go through the door, or just went through the door with multiple rifles since it was unlocked, or go through the door with multiple rifles and ballistic shields since it was unlocked, or if it was locked, to use the Halligan tool they had and breach the door. Any of those scenarios would have been acceptable police procedure in an active killer situation.
And better than what you witnessed in those photos. I do want to ask you, the director also said that the on-scene commander, Chief Arredondo, decided to put the lives of officers before the lives of children. From your perspective, what you've seen, what you've heard, with so many years of law enforcement experience, is that a fair assessment?
I agree it is. Why would they be at the end of the hall if they weren't retreating from the gunfire? I mean, there's no reason to be at the end of the hall. They should have pressed to contact. I heard the chief also said he didn't know it was the on-scene commander. You know, begs the question, did he know he was the chief? Because he should have known that, and then he would have known he was the on-scene commander. But it should have been a very aggressive press to contact, open that door, engage him, and kill him. Pry the door open, shoot through the window, any action, any action. The only bad decision here was inaction and not pressing. It could have been locked, and they might have had a scheme around to breach it or make an emergency assault or shot through the window, Tom. But this just makes you sick to your stomach to know that children were in there bleeding out for an hour.
Yeah, NBC News analyst Jim Kavanaugh. Jim, we always thank you for your analysis and expertise. Okay, we turn now to Capitol Hill in the fourth public hearing in the January 6th investigation. The committee focusing today on the effort to overturn the votes of several key states and the pressure campaign by the president's inner circle. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake has the details.
The January 6th committee today outlining a scheme they say began well before the attack on the Capitol, pressuring key state officials to find Trump votes or send fake pro-Trump electors to Washington from states Joe Biden won.
Anyone who got in the way of Donald Trump's continued hold on power after he lost the election was the subject of a dangerous and escalating campaign of pressure.
Republican officials in Pennsylvania and Michigan describing the aggressive push from Trump allies to intervene.
All of my personal information was doxed online.
All I remember is receiving just shy of 4,000 text messages over a short period of time, calling to take action.
Arizona's Republican pro-Trump House Speaker Rusty Bowers testifying that repeated calls and visits with Rudy Giuliani and other Trump lawyers produced no evidence of election fraud in his state.
Did you ever receive from him that evidence either during the call, after the call, or to this day?
Never.
Bowers growing emotional as he described what he felt was an effort to convince him to support Mr. Trump's claims anyway and ignore his oath to the Constitution.
And so for me to do that because somebody just asked me to is foreign to my very being. I will not do it.
Prior to the hearing, Mr. Trump posting on social media, calling Bowers, quote, the latest rhino to play along with the unselect committee, and saying Bowers told him the election was rigged.
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence.
The committee also questioning Georgia's top election officials, including about this recorded phone call from January 2nd between Mr. Trump and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified.
And a former Georgia election worker and her mother caught up in a bogus conspiracy theory about illegal votes, attacked by Mr. Trump on the same call.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? But he targeted me, Lady Ruby.
All right, Garrett Haake joins us now. Garrett, you know, there was an alarming statement that you mentioned there in your piece that Republican Speaker of the House, Rusty Bowers, testified to discussing a conversation he had with Rudy Giuliani where the former mayor apparently said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have. To me, that was so shocking because these Trump supporters and the former president, they weren't only pressuring election officials around the country. In the case of Arizona, Rudy Giuliani allegedly saying they didn't have the evidence. They essentially were doing this knowing that they didn't have the facts on their side.
Yeah, and the committee says that's the kind of thing they were doing everywhere all along in this process, essentially stalling for time, hoping that the facts would catch up to the theories that they had already put forward. But there's a designated timeline for these kinds of things. There's the Safe Harbor Day when the Electoral College meets. That's when all these challenges are supposed to be over. And they were certainly supposed to be over by January 6th, by which time any of the theories had been debunked, the evidence still not there. That's been a core element to the committee's case, and Bowers really made it clear today.
Yeah, and Garrett, I think the committee's making clear this was just not about the January 6th riots. This was about so much more. Where do they go from here, and where do the findings go from here?
No, it's such a good point. I mean, we call this, it is the January 6th committee, but their effort really begins on Election Day and spans all the way through the end of the Trump administration. This next hearing is going to be focused on what they describe as a pressure campaign inside the Department of Justice, again, to try to find evidence that fit the theories they already had. That hearing's coming up on Thursday. After that, Tom, it's a little bit of a mystery. The committee has been getting in more information, more tips. We heard today they want to talk to former White House counsel Pat Cipollone. It's not really clear what the timeline will be for their next steps beyond Thursday.
Garrett Haake for us tonight. Garrett, we appreciate it. Moving now to the pain at the pump. Oil executives predicting years of crude supply issues, and economists are upping the probability of a recession in the next year. Maura Barrett has the latest on how the White House is trying to tackle these tough trends.
Tonight, more bad news for drivers, as ExxonMobil's CEO predicts years of tight supply.
You're probably looking at 3 to 5 years of continued fairly tight markets.
In other words, scarce production and potentially not enough oil to go around. The executive also responding to President Biden, who accused the U.S. oil industry of capitalizing on the supply shortage for profit.
How damaging is it to be attacked by the U.S. president saying you're making more money than God?
Well, we tend to look past a lot of the political rhetoric that we see day in and day out, and you've got to be thinking through not just today and tomorrow or the next year or the next administration, but through this very long time horizon.
This controversy as human rights groups condemn Biden for his upcoming visit to Saudi Arabia next month, which he denies is aiming at getting the Saudis to pump more oil.
COVID is down, but gas prices are up. Our work isn't done.
It's very difficult to believe that you'd be going to see Saudi Arabia and not wanting to talk about oil.
U.S. oil production peaked in December 2019 with over 400 million barrels pumped in the field. Throughout the pandemic, production starting to creep back, but it's not even close to pre-COVID levels. Refining capacity to turn that crude oil into gasoline is also down, about 1 million barrels per day, or 5% since 2020.
I think the point people don't make is that a lot of these refineries are changing to make renewable diesel. That ultimately relates to the fact that the companies want to minimize their emissions because they're being told by the government to minimize their emissions.
Mix in a war in Ukraine, Russian sanctions, and high demand for summer travel. It's all driving the national average for a gallon of gas stubbornly high, around $5 a gallon. And it's hitting Americans where it hurts. Jennifer Carrico from Tennessee said high gas prices almost derailed her summer vacation.
It really makes you think twice.
She says her family cut back so they could afford to travel.
We stay at home. We've stayed at home a lot just so we can go on vacation.
It's that sort of behavior that worries economists. Holding back on spending due to high prices could help push the economy into a recession. Goldman Sachs now puts the probability of a recession in the next year at 30%. Up from 15%. Some people taking things a step further. Antoine Faulkner in Kentucky donating plasma for some extra cash.
Right now, it's definitely helping. Gas is high. Just when you need extra money, it's an easy process.
Americans going to the extreme to pay at the pump with no immediate relief in sight.
That's quite the visual right there, donating blood to pay for sky-high gas prices. With that, Maura Barrett joins us now from Washington. Maura, President Biden is considering a gas tax holiday. We reported on this yesterday. When could we get word of that? And it's also getting some pushback from some Democrats.
Right, Tom, we heard from former President Obama's economic advisor, Jason Furman, weighing in today, pointing out that these types of tax cuts don't just benefit consumers. It actually will also benefit oil and gas producers. And it also means that more gas isn't being produced and distributed, which is what could permanently bring prices down. And so the president is set to make a decision in coming days in order to set Americans up for success ahead of the July 4th holiday. And so So this is something that is obviously top of mind for Americans, but important to note that cheaper gas prices will just be temporary, and that could drive demand, which could just push inflation even higher. Tom?
Maura Barrett for us tonight. Maura, we thank you for that. Now to power and politics. While the countdown is on until the midterms, President Biden's plans for 2024 are still up in the air, with a field of likely contenders already lining up on the Republican side. President Biden is said to be weighing a second bid for office, but the timing remains uncertain. Tara Palmieri, she's the senior political correspondent and writes the Washington Mall for Puck News. She's spoken with senior officials inside the White House. Tara, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. So take us inside the West Wing and the president's deliberation process for 2024. When might he make his decision? And then there are reports of a whisper campaign already underway by Democrats that he not run.
Right. So right now, the president isn't under any pressure to publicly decide right now if he's going to run or not. But that doesn't stop the anxiety within the Democratic Party as they try to line up a bench in case the president, who will be 80 in November, decides that he does not want to run for re-election. The issue right now is that his polling is very low at 39%, according to a recent Reuters poll. And then Yahoo News and YouGov had a poll recently showing that 40% of people who voted for Joe Biden do not want him to run again in 2024. So this is just from the outside, public opinion and the optics of Joe Biden running for re-election. Then you have to factor in that Joe Biden is thinking about his family. It's something that he thought of when he thought about running in 2016. After the death of his son, Beau Biden, he ultimately decided after a long time not to run for president. The same thing in 2020, he ultimately decided to run for president, but after a long time deliberating, he was one of the last candidates to enter the race. It was, I think, April 2019 before the 2020 race. And so everyone is fully expecting that Biden, who's known for being ponderous, not always deliberate, and taking his time when deciding, will probably stretch it beyond the expected window when he should announce publicly whether he's running or not, which will be in between November after the midterm elections and January. They expect that to maybe last until the spring, and that could leave the Democratic Party and other potential candidates in the lurch while they try to be respectful to the current president and
they have to play catch up. That's a great point, Tara. They would have to play catch up. So the president, as you outlined there, has a problem when it comes to domestic issues. He has a problem with polls. He has an age problem when we talk about 2024. And he has a problem when it comes to support and the reasons to run for re-election, right? He would need a compelling reason to run. But is there enough time for him to turn this around? Because there have been other presidents who have struggled early in the first terms, namely Bill Clinton, and yet were able to win re-election. So is there enough time for him?
That's a really good question. And Barack Obama, the last Democratic president, also faced sweeping midterm shellacking, as they said. I think that was his words, that they lost the House and the Senate in, it was 2010 after the election. And that's the same thing that's likely to happen to Biden. So just because the Democrats will likely be down after this midterm election doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Biden wouldn't win re-election in 2024. In fact, I believe 90% of the midterm elections since the 1900s, they were handed over to the opposite party of the president in power, right? So this is a very frequent thing that happens. The problem is, does Joe Biden want to go back out there and fight for this? And who he will be up against is most likely former President Trump, who has changed the game in terms of civility when fighting politically. And also, it's going to be a very different election than it was in 2020 when he could pretty much campaign from his home because of COVID. Now he'll have to be out there both running the country and running against the former president or another candidate like a Ron DeSantis. And right now, he's really thinking about his family, and the Republicans are likely to win the House, and they are ready to go after his son, Hunter, who's already under a federal investigation. They are talking about a huge show, trials, hearings. The White House could turn into a war room dealing with subpoenas. Now, if President Biden decides not to run for re-election, that won't happen, right? His daughter, most recently, her diary has become a public interest, and his brother has also been criticized for his lobbying efforts. So he's got a whole family to consider as well, and that's front of mind for the Bidens.
Yeah. the campaign trail going ahead could be very grueling for him. Let's talk about Republicans. You did mention former President Trump there. There's been a lot of talk about Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. The two have been sort of, I don't want to say they've been at it because they haven't, but we heard from recently from President Trump about what a matchup would look like. What are your sources telling you about the primary process? Because Governor Ron DeSantis, no doubt, is becoming very, very popular for Republicans.
Absolutely. And for Democrats, they're terrified of Ron DeSantis, mostly because the optics of running Joe Biden, who we said will be 80 in November, against someone like Ron DeSantis who's in his 40s and he's young. So that's an optical issue that the Democrats are looking at as well, and something that the Republicans realize. I mean, Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden in 2020, and yet he wants to run against him in 2024. Not necessarily the strongest hand for the Republicans when putting forward a candidate. Now, he is still one of the most popular Republicans in the country, according to all polling. He is still a leader of the GOP. But Ron DeSantis every month keeps creeping up and becoming a very powerful voice in the GOP, especially as he goes after these culture issues, these culture war issues. And as he uses the power of being governor of Florida to really enact kind of another version of the Trump America First agenda, right? So he has an actual bully pulpit being governor, whereas President Trump doesn't have Twitter anymore. He's sort of out of the game, and Ron DeSantis is becoming a star in the GOP, and Trump is threatened by that. And you're gonna. It's very low key right now. But if it does play out in a primary, I could expect it'll be really brutal. And President Trump doesn't like to lose, just like we saw in 2020. Is he really going to concede if Ron DeSantis beats him in a primary? I mean, that's a whole other question.
That's actually, that's a great question. We'd have to wait and see. Tara Palmieri, she writes the Washington Mall for Puck News. If you love politics, make sure to check it out. Tara, we'll definitely have you back on again. Thanks for joining Top Story tonight. We want to stay in Washington now. The Supreme Court tonight has taken another brick out of the wall of separating church and state. The justices approving the use of taxpayer money to support religious education. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams has more.
The ruling is a victory for Amy Carson, who lives with her husband in Maine. They sent their daughter to the same religious high school they attended, Bangor Christian. They say it teaches values that are important in their lives.
It's an extension of how we raise her at the house. The beliefs that the school has are in line with what we have at the home.
But because that school provides an explicitly religious education, the Carsons were not eligible to receive tuition money from the state. Maine gives taxpayer money to families who live in areas that don't have public high schools. But the state bans using that public money to send children to schools that offer religious instruction, saying it wants to avoid subsidizing religion. Today, by a vote of 6-3, the Supreme Court said that's religious discrimination. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said Maine promotes stricter separation of church and state than the federal Constitution requires. He said once a state offers taxpayer money to benefit public schools, it cannot leave out religious ones.
This is one of a series of decisions in which the court's conservative majority has been incredibly protective of religion and has said that the government cannot discriminate, including when it's spending public money.
In dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said the decision, quote, leads us to a place where separation of church and state becomes a constitutional violation.
All right, Pete joins us now. So, Pete, the separation of church and state is so paramount to our Constitution. This case feels a bit narrow, and that's not a criticism. I'm asking because what are the larger implications here? Does this open the door to larger cases involving the government and religion?
Yeah, it is narrow because it's explicitly about Maine, but you're right. The principle is the broad thing here. The court is now sort of, in the past it would say, states have to be neutral. They can't either favor or inhibit religion. Here they are saying, well, no, you can't be neutral because that's discrimination. If you're going to give aid to public schools, you have to give it to private schools as well. And that's really a step that the Supreme Court has never taken before. So the immediate effect is on Maine. There's a similar program in Vermont. But I think the next step would be the sort of maybe dozen to 20 states that want to expand their voucher programs that allow taxpayer money to go for parents to send their children to private schools. And that would apparently include religious schools. So it's just another step along that avenue.
So, Pete, let's also take a look ahead. I know you've been in standby mode over these past few days. There are still a number of high-profile rulings yet to come down, including the decision on overturning Roe v. Wade. What do we know about possible timing for those?
Nothing. But an educated guess would be that it's going to be a while yet. The next scheduled decision day is Thursday. Then there's a decision day on Monday after that. We've got 13 cases left to go. I think that it's very possible, Tom, that we may not get that decision until early July. I think this term is not going to be over at the end of June at the rate they're going.
All right, Pete Williams for us tonight. Pete, we thank you for that. Now to the dangerous heat wave threatening millions of Americans. Temperatures soaring into the high 90s and 100s, more than 100 daily records expected to be shattered by the end of the week. Let's get right to our meteorologist, Bill Cairns. Bill, it's the first day of summer, which is surprising because it's been so hot for so long. It certainly feels like it for much of the country, right?
Yeah, I feel like we've had this conversation, like, how are we on week 3? Like the same thing over and over again. But this time we have a chance. We haven't set like any really super impressive records. Yes, Minneapolis hit 101. We were close to 100 at O'Hare in Chicago. And it's been a while since that region of the country was in the hundreds. And now we're watching things kind of spreading because the orange colors show you where we have heat advisories. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle map out here. So New Orleans, Memphis, Tulsa, Kansas City, Milwaukee, all those areas are under heat advisories. And the current heat index, even as we're now getting to the evening, through the evening rush hour, still brutal in Memphis, 106. You notice how widespread it is. There's not many areas that aren't feeling oppressively hot. Finally, some cooler air for you in Minneapolis. I know you enjoyed that today after the week you've had. So what are we going to look at in the next 2 days? I still think Thursday is the peak of our dangerous hot conditions for areas of the South. It's not going to be fun tomorrow. 102 in Tallahassee. Atlanta's going to hit 100. It's been 10 years since Atlanta's had 2 100-degree days in a row. We could do that Wednesday and on Thursday, so that's something to watch. New Orleans, typical heat for you, feeling like 105. And this would be the headline. If Tallahassee can hit the predicted 105 on Thursday, that would tie their all-time hottest temperature ever recorded in the cities. Well, obviously we get to 106. So this is heat like almost no one has seen that lives in areas of the Panhandle. And it's going to be a dry heat too, so it's going to be very unusual. They're actually warning people to be careful, make sure they drink enough water, because it's not going to be that typical humidness that you feel. And then as we head towards the weekend, the heat really builds from Mississippi into areas of Houston. It just keeps going and going. And even towards the end of June, we're going to stay very hot here through the southern half of the country. And very dry, too. They're talking flash drought in areas of the Ohio Valley. And, Tom, I'll end on this. If you're on social media and follow any meteorologists out there, today is National Warming Stripes Day. The Mets unite. We talk about the temperature, how it's changed as we've gone throughout over the last 100 to 140 years. So this actually represents, each line represents a year. And this starts in the 1850s, and this takes us all the way out to 2021. And you can notice, compared to average, it was kind of cool. And look what's happened over the last 20, 30 years, how we have warmed our planet considerably. So just a little visual example, just want to let people know what's happening where you and I live.
Okay, Bill, we appreciate it. Thanks for joining us tonight. Still ahead, the latest on the legal battles involving Deshaun Watson. The Cleveland Browns quarterback reportedly reaching a settlement with 20 out of the 24 women accusing him of sexual misconduct. Will this impact his future in the NFL? Plus, the new video showing a father defending himself against a gunman while he's holding his 7-month-old baby. What may have saved their lives? Stay with us.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
It's a can't-miss summer on Today.
They are walking strong, elegant, and pretty easy to prepare.
How to cut costs on your vacation. Vicky has the answers. Every single thing you need for the best summer yet.
Only on Today.
Fire has grown leaps and bounds.
What you see behind me is typical. How you doing?
Pretty bad.
At 73, Prince Charles is still waiting for the job that is his birthright.
Do we want Charles? Do we want a monarchy?
I'm Keir Simmons, and we'll take on these questions and more in our new podcast, Born to Rule. Listen now.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Fire has grown leaps and bounds. What you see behind me is typical. How you doing?
Pretty
pretty bad.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Women's basketball has been systematically held back. After 49 years of Title IX, we still have work to do.
In Their Court, a podcast from NBC News and NBC Sports that goes inside the issues of inequality in women's sports. Listen now.
News is happening now.
To look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
All right, we're back now with Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson reportedly reaching a confidential settlement with 20 out of the 24 women accusing him of sexual misconduct. The women, all massage therapists, allege that Watson exposed himself and in some cases coerced them for sex during sessions. Watson has denied any wrongdoing. NBC's Jesse Kirsch has more.
Tonight, embattled NFL star Deshaun Watson has settled sexual misconduct lawsuits with 20 women, according to the accuser's lawyer, who says 4 more women's lawsuits are still moving forward, including from Ashley Solis, who spoke with HBO.
He deliberately grabs himself and put his penis on my hand, and I pulled my hand away instantly, and I started crying, and I told him that I'm done.
Disturbing allegations have swirled around Watson since March 2021, when he was the Houston Texans quarterback. 22 women filed lawsuits, but 2 grand juries declined to indict him on criminal charges. Then the Cleveland Browns signed Watson to a blockbuster $230 million contract this year.
We felt good about everything that we collected. We felt good about Deshaun as a person.
But the lawsuits kept piling up in recent weeks, totaling 24, with the most recent alleging Watson masturbated in front of a female massage therapist. No word from Watson's attorney on the settlement, but the quarterback denied the claims last week.
I never assaulted anyone, or I never harassed anyone, or I never disrespected anyone. I never forced anyone to do anything.
Tonight, the NFL says there's no impact on its investigation and Watson's possible suspension.
If anything, it puts less pressure on the NFL. Here's why. It had to consider seriously putting Deshaun Watson on paid leave until these cases were completely and totally resolved.
All right, Jesse Kirsch joins us now live from Berea, Ohio. So, Jesse, what does Watson's settlement mean for those other 4 women?
Yeah, so, Tom, those 4 women's cases are not a part of these settlements, according to the accuser's attorney. That means those civil cases continue to move forward. And a legal analyst told me earlier, depending on who authorities have talked to, prosecutors, police, investigators, there is still the potential for more criminal prosecution for Deshaun Watson. Again, those 2 grand juries declined to indict him. However, depending on who authorities have talked to, his legal troubles at large may not be over here, Tom.
All right, Jesse Kirsch for us tonight. Jesse, we thank you for that. When we come back, the renaming reversal. Comedian Dave Chappelle declined to have a theater named after him while he was there for the ceremony. His reasons coming up next.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Still to come in the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now. Still too close to call. Lester Holt reporting from the Ground Zero, as it's being referred to. It is, in fact, the taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
It's a can't-miss summer on Today.
They are walking strong, elegant, and pretty easy to prepare.
How to cut costs on your vacation? Vicky has the answers. Every single thing you need for the best summer yet.
Only on Today.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Making Space, the inspirational podcast from Hoda Kotb. Listen now.
Women's basketball has been systematically held back. After 49 years of Title IX, we still have work to do.
In Their Court, a podcast from NBC News and NBC Sports that goes inside the issues of inequality in women's sports. Listen now.
It's a can't-miss summer on Today.
They are walking strong, elegant, and pretty easy to prepare.
How to cut costs on your vacation? Vicky has the answers. Every single thing you need for the best summer yet.
Only on Today.
Women's basketball has been systematically held back. After 49 years of Title IX, we still have work to do.
In Their Court, a podcast from NBC News and NBC Sports that goes inside the issues of inequality in women's sports. Listen now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
All right, we are back now with Newsfeed and an update on that plane emergency at Miami International Airport we brought you at the top of the broadcast. Authorities now say at least 3 people have been hospitalized. The Red Air flight from the Dominican Republic bursting into flames after the landing gear in the nose collapsed. The fire is under control and officials are now monitoring the fuel spillage. Okay, now to the father fighting off a gunman while holding his 7-month-old baby. You heard that right. Surveillance video shows it all from a gas station in Detroit. It shows the suspect point the gun at the man and his child. The father manages to push the gun away and the suspect takes off. Police say the man did try to fire the gun, but it malfunctioned. He has been arrested. And a major policy change today for the Chicago Police Department. Officers will no longer be allowed to chase people on foot if they are only suspected of minor offenses. These include parking violations, driving on a suspended license, or public alcohol consumption. A draft of the policy was put in place after the fatal police shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo and 22-year-old Anthony Alvarez, both happening after foot pursuits. And comedian Dave Chappelle declined having his former high school theater named after him. The comedian announced the decision while in Washington for the dedication ceremony. Current students had protested the renaming over controversy surrounding Chappelle's Netflix special, The Closer. He says he doesn't agree with the backlash, but does not want the new name to be distracting to students. It will now be the Theater for Artistic Freedom and Expression. All right, coming up, a travel nightmare overseas. 80% of trains canceled in the UK today. The cause coming up.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition. The fire has grown leaps and bounds. What you see behind me is typical. How you doing?
Pretty bad.
This is a very different kind of program. We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world. Professor, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but what do we think that the new normal is going to be? Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs during this pandemic and their relationship to their employers? What is your biggest tip for any parent who's concerned about this? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
When was the last time you made space to listen to somebody?
What I learned from a very young age is radical love, radical forgiveness.
We are meeting people one after the next who have made profound changes.
It showed a lot of personal strength for me. Why am I trying to make other people happy over myself?
So many life lessons that are going on in these conversations. We're watching a transformation.
Join Hoda Kotb for her podcast, Making Space. Listen now.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
The fire has grown leaps and bounds. What you see behind me is typical. How you doing?
Pretty bad.
NBC News, streaming free now.
When was the last time you made space to listen to somebody?
What I learned from a very young age is radical love, radical forgiveness.
We are meeting people one after the next who have made profound changes.
It showed a lot of personal strength for me. Why am I trying to make other people happy over myself?
So many life lessons that are going on in these conversations. We're watching a transformation.
Join Hoda Kotb for her podcast, Making Space. Listen now. Making Space, the inspirational podcast from Hoda Kotb. Listen now.
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Ukraine, from Mayfield, Kentucky, from Waukesha, Wisconsin. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
I also want to get home.
You'll get home. You'll get home. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Time for Top Story's Global Watch, and the violent clashes breaking out in Nepal over a fuel price hike.